Hi, David. How's it going?
Good, Rhiannon. How are you doing?
Good, doing well. It's great to have you here. We're super, super excited to have you on our program committee this year for RailsConf.
I'm very excited to be part of it.
Absolutely. And thank you for coming to chat. Wanted to just ask you a couple questions, a little bit about your experience working on the program for the final RailsConf in Philadelphia this summer. And maybe you can share some teasers, like what can folks expect from the program this year? Because I think by the time this is published, the program and the speakers still won't have been released. So anything fun you can share with the community would be amazing. Yeah, would love to get started just hearing a little bit more about you and your journey. How long have you been working with Ruby on Rails?
So I stumbled into Ruby on Rails on accident back in, it was 2008 or 9. I got hired at a marketing company in Kansas City to do Java work for them. And I showed up on the first day and they said, "We don't have anything for you to work on in Java, but we're still going to hire you. We're just going to put you on a different team.
Oh,
Go
geez.
learn this thing called Ruby on Rails." So that was how I fell into Ruby on Rails and decided I liked it a whole lot more than the other things that I had been doing before.
So, what is it that you love about working with Ruby and Rails?
What do I love? When I found Ruby, it was like the amount of effort and time and energy that I had to put into trying to understand a bit of code, comparing Ruby against Java and PHP at the time. It just felt like it was so much easier to understand what the code was trying to do. And there's the phrase that has been bandied about over the years multiple times that Ruby and Rails was geared towards developer happiness. And that's the thing that I just felt that, oh, the people who designed this language and designed this framework, they're not worried about optimizing compute cycles because compute cycles are just getting cheaper and cheaper the better we get at building computers. They're optimizing for making it easier for the developer to write code, to understand code that somebody else wrote, so that we can keep pushing forward and doing our job to maintain and enhance these applications. And that's the thing that's really sold me on the language and the platform and kept me here for a decade and a half.
That is something that I hear time and time again from this community, like Rails and Ruby. It's all about joy. It's all about developer happiness. And I think that is why this ecosystem has thrived for so long comparatively to many other programming languages and frameworks. So I also know that you have an incredible podcast where you have been interviewing folks from previous Rails comps who have been involved in some capacity, like folks within the team here at Ruby Central, people who have spoken or contributed in some way. Tell us more about that because that's such an incredible project.
Yeah, so the podcast itself is called the Ode to RailsConf podcast. That very literally came about from the announcement last year that this upcoming RailsConf would be the final one. I heard some people chatting, wishing that somebody would make like a documentary or something about RailsConf. And the idea of that sounded really cool and interesting. I had wanted to do a podcast for a while and felt like I needed to have some kind of core idea or theme to it. I had a lot of fun, positive memories from RailsConf over the years. And I felt like if I did, then other people probably did too. Shouldn't be that big of a revelation, but sometimes it is. And so I just floated that idea past a couple of people in the community that I trusted and figured if this is a terrible idea, at least one of them will let me down gently. But every single one of them was like, yes, you should do this. But yeah, it's just been these very casual conversations with people about their experiences at RailsConf, just to share those stories.
I love that. And a follow-up question, have there been any particular stories that have really stood out to you or surprised you in the process of recording these?
There are a couple of them. The first one is a specific episode and is probably unsurprising. It's the episode where I had DHH on the podcast. That was so surreal to begin, having never really interacted with him on a personal level before. It was really wild just being like, I think I asked him a total of 3 questions throughout the episode, and he was just so comfortable just talking on at length about whatever those topics were. So it was really surreal to have kind of a firsthand interaction and experience with DHH.
That's incredible. And I actually reached out to him in 2020 when I was writing my book about remote work, and he responded to me immediately to connect me with someone on his team to interview for my book. So,
Nice.
yeah,
Yeah,
really cool that
that's
he does that.
that's the sentiment that I've picked up on him as well. He seems to generally be pretty good about responding to people.
Yeah, which is really cool. Was that like one of your first episodes when you launched the podcast, or?
It actually wasn't. I think it was part of my journey with the podcast was like I went all in really fast on it, and I was recording three, sometimes four episodes a week. Like my initial plan with the podcast was I was going to release one episode a month because I had no idea, no expectation about how easy it was going to be to get guests to talk with me about anything. And so I think I released two or three episodes on a monthly cadence before I suddenly had so many backed up. I was like, oh, okay, it's time to go to to weekly because I've got enough of a backlog that I feel comfortable. I'm not going to suddenly like miss weeks. And so I think I went twice a month first and then finally went to weekly. So DHH's episode was technically like the episode count of that he was released on. He was episode six, I think,
Nice.
but he was actually like the 12th recorded episode or something like that. I was too excited about that episode to want to hold on to it that long.
It's totally fair. Who was your first guest? What was your first episode?
The actual number one was Chris Oliver. He's been very supportive of the podcast from the beginning. I'm not sure I would be doing it if it hadn't been for his encouragement.
He's a great guy. And obviously, or maybe not obviously to our listeners, but Chris Oliver is also a co-chair this year for the final RailsConf.
Yeah,
Now that you've been doing it for almost a year, you've been able to meet and have conversations with so many interesting folks in the community through your podcast. But is there anything that you've gotten from podcasting outside of being able to like have those conversations and build those connections? Because obviously you're very focused on building and coding and deploying things in your day-to-day work. And this is something that feels so different.
I feel like it has helped me personally. I've mentioned this multiple times on the podcast to the point that I'm afraid that the people who are listening are tired of hearing it. But I'm a self-diagnosed introvert. I have a hard time meeting new people and getting to know them and engaging in the small talk that usually comes with trying to get to know a new person for the first time. But doing these podcast episodes and having an opportunity to chat with someone in a really low stakes, low risk environment has done a lot to help me start to feel more comfortable to the point that by the time RubyConf rolled around this past November, I was deep into doing the podcast, and I felt different at that conference than I had at any other conference I'd attended. Most of the time, I tend to have one really good day where I'm able to amp myself up into being energetic and outgoing, trying to interact with people, and then I crash the rest of the time. I didn't ever crash at RubyConf. I just felt so energized and so excited about being there the whole time. And part of that was also that I was volunteering at RubyConf and doing what I could to assist. But like the whole experience there of the positive experience I had as a volunteer combined with feeling so energized about it all anyways, coming from which I attribute to the podcast, is what led me to be on the program committee here. I was pretty shameless about going to every member of Ruby Central I could find and telling them in no uncertain terms that I wanted to be involved and I wanted to help any way I could. And being that blatant about something that I wanted is not something I think I would have felt comfortable doing 6 months earlier.
I love that you really shot your shot and asked for what you wanted. And I think that really is such a lesson too, because it is so easy to get caught up in like our day-to-day jobs and the grind of programming or whatever it is we're working on. But you being able to create this space for yourself and give this back to the community, and now getting to be involved in RailsConf in this way is so inspiring.
Thank you. It's been a lot of fun for me to do this.
It really is incredible the amount of time and effort and commitment that goes into being a program committee member and helping put together the schedule, decide who's speaking, and just creating an all-star lineup for this landmark event. Could you tell us a little bit more about what that process is like? I think Noel tweeted or posted on Bluesky recently about the process, which is a really interesting thread for anyone who wants to go to Noel's Bluesky and read that. But from your perspective, what actually goes on behind the scenes?
I'm probably going to cover some of the same ground that Noel did in that Blue Sky thread. But the way it's set up through the initial rating of the proposals is it's a blind process. We don't know the name of the person who submitted the talk unless they've very clearly stated their own name in what they submitted to us. We have these,
Encouraged, right?
it's generally not encouraged. There were a couple where it was there. It's like, okay, we know who this person is now. But at that point, for me at least, I was in such a mental state where I was not paying that much attention to who it was because I wasn't expecting to know who any of them were, that it didn't really impact a whole lot. Because we're trying to look at the talks for the content themselves and what was proposed, regardless of who proposed it. Going through and looking at all these talks blind, the system gives us three at a time and asks us to rate them one, two, and three. And then it just goes through that process over and over again until it has figured out how to grade the whole set of them for us based on the recommendations that we've given it. And that was a fun process for me.
Now that you've been behind the scenes for reviewing CFPs and you understand the rubric, the components of a really great CFP, like what is it that you and the rest of the group are really looking for, or the elements of a CFP that would make them stand out and give it that highest rating for you?
There's a couple of things. The first one is paying attention to what the conference itself says in terms of a theme or tracks or anything like that. It was announced pretty early that the theme for RailsConf is the past, present, and future of Rails. So there were several talks that really spoke to that, looking at the history of things or talking about how things have evolved over time or proposing ideas for how things can evolve from this point that were very thematically connected to what we were looking for. So I think those tended to get rated higher. The amount of detail that went into a lot of the proposals, there's a pretty wide variance. Some of them were very short, just a couple of sentences long, and other ones were a detailed outline. Those that tended towards more detail tended to get rated higher. We feel a lot more confident and comfortable that you know what you're talking about, that you can put together a talk with the adequate amount of time and detail and technical expertise, whereas the proposals that had two or three sentences in a paragraph with a very vague topic, we don't know who you are because it's the blind part of the process, and we don't have as much of a comfort level with what you're proposing because it's still very vague and loose. You don't have to submit a detailed outline of the talk, but the more detail you are able to give, the more planning you've already put in at that point, the better your chances are.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's really looking at the quality and the depth and the relation to theme first and foremost. And then you're taking into consideration who is the person presenting and putting those pieces together. I think by the time we publish this, like I said, we won't have publicly released our programs or list of speakers. Maybe you could give us a little teaser. What sort of things can the community expect from this year's RailsConf program? What are you excited about?
There's a couple of things I'm excited about. There's a number of talks that are history of type things, or like looking back at Rails over the years and talking about how things were and how they've evolved over time. That, especially for newer Rails developers who are coming in, like people who started with Rails 7 or 8, there's going to be aspects of the history of Rails that they might not have heard of before that I think are interesting case studies and object lessons and how things can and will evolve over time in this field. You might have to edit this part out because there's a workshop that is going to be there for Hotwire Native, and I'm working through learning and using Hotwire Native for some personal projects right now. So I'm really excited to see that workshop.
Asterisk, I will see. I will check with the powers that be if I can keep that in or not. But go on.
Fair. But then outside of that, as connected back to my work with the podcast, so much of what I've come to appreciate and love is the community itself and how supportive the whole community tends to be of each other and wanting to work together and build something together. So that's a big part of what I'm looking forward to, being able to come together with a bunch of fellow Rubyists to celebrate this big milestone. Being able to celebrate it together for all the good times that we've had while it was around is a big part of what I'm looking forward to.
That's amazing. Do you think there's anything about this year's program that makes it particularly unique compared to previous conferences?
I'm not sure I can answer that question very well.
That's okay.
Um, we, as the program committee, we somehow had a really good balance. If you are coming for some good technical content to learn the actual programming of things in certain ways, there are going to be those talks, but there's also a decent collection of talks that are the non-technical skills, the history stuff, other type of things, where it opens things up to a potentially wider audience. There should be something here for anyone who wants to learn something, even remotely connected to Ruby on Rails.
So it sounds like this year's conference, whether you're a newcomer to Rails and you're working in your first Rails job or you've been involved for 15 plus years, there's something everyone can get out of it. And also just the opportunity to celebrate with everyone and really just appreciate this community and everything we've been through together. It's so exciting.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's going to be really incredible, I think.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. I'm excited for this conference, despite the fact that it's the final one.
I think we're going to go out with a bang. I'm feeling good about it, especially having seen what you guys have in store. It's going to be a good one.
Yeah, I think it was 250 different proposals that came in for the CFP. So we had a lot, even with what I mentioned before about some of them being really short and some of them being really long, like even if you lop off all the short ones and say that those were not clear enough or not detailed enough, we had so many good proposals that whittling it down to just 30 was difficult. So we had to really go through and really question, like, what are we looking for? Have we overrepresented anything? Have we underrepresented anything? There were several conversations where I was like, we got to make sure we have enough front end stuff versus back end stuff and things like that. But I hope that what we've managed to do is a really solid conference, and I'm looking forward to attending as much as like of the panels and talks as I can.
Absolutely. And one last question for you. I'd love to ask about your favorite RailsConf moment. What is that one moment or memory that sticks in your head from a past RailsConf?
I think this was 2019, the one time thus far where I've given a talk at RailsConf. And I'm standing towards the front, and the track lead was about to go up and introduce me. And I saw Aaron Patterson come in and sit down in the room that I was giving a talk in. He's been keynoting RailsConf forever. One of my first RailsConfs, I had this kind of funny experience with him. I was attending a talk by Ernie Miller, and Ernie was diving into the internals of active record callbacks. And he showed this snippet of code on the screen and asked it, does anyone know what this does? And there's a single hand in the room that goes up, and it's Aaron. Like, yeah, Aaron, I know that's you in the room. Put your hand down. No one else knows what this does. But it was like that first kind of encounter with Aaron was like, okay, this is the kind of guy Aaron is. He's the jokester. He's brilliant, and he does a lot of things to make Ruby and Rails better, but he's also a bit of a jokester. And so I always just kind of had this special place in my heart for him. Oh, I'd love to meet him and talk to him sometime. but I'm heavily in my introverted phase and I haven't started the podcast yet. So like seeing him come in and sit down in my talk, I still look back at that and I think, wow, that was so cool and meaningful to me. Like Aaron Patterson could look at my talk and be like, I want to see what he has to say about something. Since he spends so much of his time dealing with the very back end Ruby language stuff. And I was giving a talk about like the very front end hotwire HTML type stuff. That was probably one of my favorite memories. I gave a talk that Aaron Patterson chose to go to.
Well, that really beautifully exemplifies what these conferences are as such a connecting point for the community. It's magical and that's so special. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, happy to.
Absolutely. David, thank you again for being part of our program committee this year. We're all super excited to see what you guys have in store. That will be rolling out this month in April. And in the meantime, where can folks find you on social media?
Social media at this point, Bluesky is probably the best place. My profile handle is davidhill.dev. And also I the Ode to RailsConf podcast on ode to railsconf.com.
Amazing. Everyone, go subscribe. And thank you again, David. I will see you in Philadelphia this summer.
Thanks, Rhiannon. Looking forward to it.